This isn't just a story I'm telling. It's a memory I have to live with every single day. The part of my life that proves the old saying that the best revenge isn't a life well lived, but a life that ends with you owning everything that was taken from you. The conference room on the 58th floor of the Sterling Thorne building felt like a glass cage suspended over Manhattan, and I felt like the specimen pinned inside. The object of my humiliation was resting on the polished mahogany between me and my boss, Arthur Sterling. A leather-bound proposal, 80 pages of my life's work, titled Project Chimera. We were gathered, the board, Arthur, and my colleague Vanessa, to hear me present the algorithm that would revolutionize our entire industry. But as Arthur stood, a predator's smile playing on his lips, he picked up my proposal and handed it to Vanessa, his voice booming with false sincerity, as he announced her as the new head of the project, a project he then proceeded to describe using the very words I had written. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. My world had been built on data, on the elegant certainty of numbers. I was a data scientist, a glorified fortune teller for the financial world, and for 10 years, Sterling Thorne Analytics had been my temple. I started as a junior analyst, fresh out of MIT, with a head full of theories and a heart full of ambition. The firm was legendary, a shark tank run by the biggest shark of them all, Arthur Sterling. He was old money, with a mane of silver hair and a patrician face that looked like it was carved from granite. He moved with the unshakable confidence of a man who had never been told no and had crushed anyone who dared to try. In my early days, I was terrified of him, but I was also in awe. His intellect was as sharp and as cold as a shard of ice. My salvation and my eventual damnation came in the form of my mentor, a man named David Chen. David was the firm's original architect, the genius who had written the foundational code that Sterling Thorne was built on. He was old school, a quiet, brilliant man who saw something in my frantic energy. He taught me how to see the narrative hidden in the noise of the market, to find the poetry in the code. He was the one who encouraged me, who pushed me to think bigger. "Don't just analyze the data, Eliza," he'd say, his voice a low rumble over a cup of stale coffee in his cluttered office. "Make the data sing." And then there was Vanessa. She arrived 3 years after I did, a whirlwind of sharp suits, a killer smile, and a resume that glittered. She was charming, politically savvy in a way I never was. I was the quiet engine in the back room. She was the polished hood ornament out front. We became friends, or so I thought. We had late-night takeout at our desks, complained about Arthur's impossible demands, and shared dreams of breaking through the glass ceiling. I trusted her. When I started working on Chimera, a predictive analytics model so advanced it bordered on prescience, Vanessa was my sounding board. I showed her everything: the architecture, the proprietary learning algorithms, the stress tests. I thought I was sharing my triumph with a friend. I was actually just handing my killer the knife. David retired 6 months before everything fell apart. His departure left a vacuum, and Arthur, who had always seemed to resent David's quiet genius, grew even more tyrannical. It was around then that Vanessa's questions about my project became more pointed, more technical. I mistook her interest for support. I was so consumed by the work, by the sheer beauty of what I was building, that I didn't see the pieces moving around me on the board. I didn't see the long, closed-door meetings between her and Arthur. I didn't see the way her smile never quite reached her eyes anymore. The morning of the presentation, I felt like I was floating. This was it. 10 years of work culminating in this moment. I'd rehearsed for weeks, knew every slide, every potential question. I walked into that 58th floor conference room, feeling like I owned the city laid out below me. Arthur greeted me with a warm handshake, his eyes glinting. "Eliza, today's the day. Don't be nervous." Vanessa gave me a hug, whispering, "You're going to kill it." The board members, stony-faced men in $1,000 suits, took their seats. The air was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and ambition. I set up my laptop, my hands trembling slightly. My proposal, the one I'd spent a small fortune to have professionally printed and bound in dark blue leather, sat at the head of the table. Project Chimera, my name embossed in silver on the cover, my legacy. Arthur stood up to introduce me. His voice filled the room, a rich baritone that commanded attention. He spoke of the future, of innovation, of a new era for Sterling Thorne. He was praising my work, my dedication. I felt a swell of pride, and then the floor dropped out from under me. "And it is with that future in mind," Arthur boomed, "that I am proud to announce a new divisional head to lead this charge, someone with the vision and the fortitude to carry this firm forward. Please join me in congratulating Vanessa Reed." The blood drained from my face. I stared at him, then at Vanessa, who was now standing, a mask of perfect, humble surprise on her face. It was a lie. The whole room was a lie. My mind was a static-filled television screen, unable to process what was happening. Arthur continued, describing the project, my project, in vivid detail, using phrases I had written, concepts I had bled for. The board members nodded, impressed. No one looked at me. It was as if I had ceased to exist. The final insult was the sharpest. After the brief, polite applause for Vanessa died down, Arthur's gaze finally fell on me. The warmth was gone, replaced by a chilling finality. "Eliza," he said, his voice flat, "as you know, we're making some structural changes. Your position has been deemed redundant. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." He slid a thick manila envelope across the table. On top of it, he placed my leather-bound proposal. Except it wasn't mine anymore. My name had been replaced. A small, gleaming silver plate now read, "Project Chimera," by Vanessa Reed. "Your severance package," he said. "Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings. You have 15 minutes. I couldn't breathe. The room was silent, save for the hum of the city far below. I looked from the doctored proposal to Vanessa's face. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She just stood there, clutching her hands together, the picture of a woman who had just been handed the world, my world. I felt 100 pairs of invisible eyes on me, the weight of my public execution pressing down. Humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, suffocating poison that filled my lungs. I didn't say a word. I simply stood, picked up the envelope and the stolen dream on top of it, and walked out of the room. The 2 security guards waiting outside the door were the final, brutal punctuation mark on the end of my life as I knew it. As they walked me through the office, past the curious, pitying stares of my colleagues, I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel anger. I felt a terrifying crystalline coldness begin to form in the hollowed-out space where my heart had been. They thought they had buried me. They didn't realize they had just planted a seed. The weeks that followed were a blur of gray. I spent the first few days in a daze, pacing my small Upper West Side apartment, the silence broken only by the sirens on Amsterdam Avenue. The severance package was generous, but it was hush money, designed to buy my silence and fund my swift disappearance. It came with an ironclad non-compete agreement that effectively blacklisted me from every major financial firm in the country for 2 years. They hadn't just fired me, they had surgically removed me from my own life. Arthur and Vanessa had planned it perfectly. They had taken my work, my career, my reputation, and left me with nothing but a check and a box of personal effects. I tried to fight it. I called a lawyer, a sharp, expensive man who listened patiently in his Park Avenue office before giving me the grim reality. "Eliza, you have no proof," he said, steepling his fingers. "You have no emails, no documents with your name on them that predate this. They control the servers. They control the narrative. Vanessa will say it was a collaboration and that you were a disgruntled junior partner." Arthur will produce a performance review citing your lack of team synergy. It's a classic corporate decapitation. They're very, very good at it. He advised me to take the money and move on. Forget revenge, he'd said with a sigh. These people build empires on the bones of people who try to get revenge. Forget. It was like telling someone to forget how to breathe. Every morning I woke up with the phantom weight of that doctored proposal in my hands. I'd see Vanessa's face in financial news headlines, touted as Wall Street's newest wunderkind. Forbes ran a feature on her. The architect of the new Wall Street. They used my words, my concepts. They ran a photo of her in Arthur's office, standing in front of a whiteboard covered in my equations. The world celebrated my ghost while I sat in my pajamas, eating cereal for dinner and watching my savings account dwindle. The humiliation wasn't a one-time event. It was a daily, grinding torture. The villain's power felt absolute. Sterling Thorne was more than a company. It was a fortress. Arthur Sterling wasn't just a CEO. He was a king in his domain, with an army of lawyers and a network that reached into every corner of the city. He was untouchable, a god on the 58th floor, and Vanessa was his chosen angel. They had all the power, all the money, all the prestige. I was a nobody, a footnote in their success story. The city that once felt like my kingdom now felt like a cage. Every skyscraper seemed to mock me, a monument to a world I was no longer a part of. My friends from work stopped calling, afraid to be associated with me. I was an outcast. My turning point didn't come in a flash of lightning. It arrived in a dusty cardboard box. David Chen, my old mentor, had emailed me a few weeks after my firing, a simple, kind message saying he was sorry to hear the news and knew I'd land on my feet. He asked a small favor. His wife was eager for him to finally clear out his old storage unit in Queens, and he wondered if I might be able to handle it for him, as his back wasn't what it used to be. He'd have the key messengered over. It felt like a menial task, but it was a reason to leave my apartment, so I agreed. The storage unit was cold, cramped, and smelled of aging paper. It was filled with boxes of David's old research notes, books, and relics from his 40-year career. I spent the afternoon sorting through them, a strange archaeology of a brilliant mind. In the very back, under a stack of outdated computer manuals, I found a series of worn, black moleskin notebooks, his personal journals. I hesitated for only a moment before opening the first one. It felt like a violation of his trust, but I was desperate for something, an answer, a connection to the person I used to be. I started reading. For hours I sat on the cold concrete floor, flipping through pages of elegant script and complex equations. Most of it was technical, but woven in were David's personal thoughts, his frustrations, his triumphs. And then I found it. It was an entry dated 7 years ago. In it, David described a flaw, a deep, structural vulnerability he had discovered in the original Sterling Thorne trading algorithm. His algorithm. He called it the Achilles gene. It was a tiny piece of legacy code, a rounding error that only manifested under extreme market volatility. Under normal conditions, it was dormant, invisible. But in a perfect storm, a flash crash, a massive, unexpected market shock, it would trigger a cascading failure, a feedback loop that would cause the system to make catastrophic billion-dollar miscalculations in microseconds. It would bankrupt the company and its clients. He had brought it to Arthur. The journal entry was filled with rage and disbelief. Arthur told me to bury it. He said a full rewrite would be too expensive, that it would spook the investors. He called the risk statistically insignificant. He chose to build his empire on a cracked foundation. The subsequent entries detailed David's secret work. He had been trying to build a patch, a new system that could neutralize the Achilles gene without requiring a full system overhaul. He called his theoretical solution Chimera. My breath caught in my chest. He had laid the groundwork. He had seen the problem, and he had conceived of the solution years before I ever did. He had never told me, probably to protect me. My project wasn't just an innovation, it was the cure to a poison that was running through the veins of the entire company. And that's when I understood. Arthur hadn't just stolen my project for its brilliance, he had stolen it because he was terrified. He knew the clock was ticking. He needed Chimera not just to get ahead, but to keep from being wiped off the map. He and Vanessa weren't just thieves, they were trying to plug a hole in a dam with a piece of stolen driftwood, and they didn't even understand the full scope of the problem they were trying to solve. They had the what, but I was the only one who now had the why. A profound calm washed over me, displacing the weeks of anger and despair. The coldness that had formed in my chest crystallized into something hard and sharp, resolve. I closed the journal. My lawyer was wrong. Revenge wasn't about suing for damages. It wasn't about getting my old job back. Revenge was about finishing my work. I wasn't going to be their victim anymore. I was going to build a better version of Chimera, and I was going to use it to expose the lie at the heart of their empire. I wasn't just going to get even. I was going to take everything. I walked out of that storage unit, leaving Eliza the victim behind. In her place was a woman with a blueprint for a war. The war began in a cramped WeWork office in Dumbo, Brooklyn, with a view of the Manhattan Bridge instead of the skyline. The irony was not lost on me. I funneled a significant portion of my severance package into leasing the space and buying 3 top-of-the-line servers. My non-compete was a cage, but I found a loophole. It barred me from being an employee at a rival firm. It said nothing about being the founder of my own independent consultancy. I named it Cassandra Analytics. In the myths, she was the prophetess, cursed to see the future, but never be believed. I was about to change the ending to that story. My first recruits were the ghosts of Sterling Thorne's past, 2 brilliant but overlooked coders, Mark and Sarah, whom Arthur had let go in a previous round of restructuring because they weren't client-facing enough. They were loyal to David Chen's memory and had a healthy disdain for Arthur's arrogance. When I showed them David's journals and explained my plan, they were in without a moment's hesitation. They were hungry, they were smarter than anyone at my old firm, and they had scores of their own to settle. We worked like a special ops team on a mission behind enemy lines. Days were fueled by cheap coffee and bodega sandwiches, nights by a shared, burning purpose. While Vanessa was being interviewed by The Wall Street Journal, I was in a glorified closet in Brooklyn, whiteboarding code until my hands were stained with marker ink. We weren't just rebuilding Chimera, we were making it better, faster, and more powerful. We built it from the ground up, specifically designed to recognize and exploit the Achilles gene in Sterling Thorne's system. My Chimera wasn't just a predictive model, it was a scalpel. The legal battle started about 4 months in. Arthur must have heard whispers. He couldn't prove I was violating my non-compete, but he didn't need proof. He had lawyers. An avalanche of paper descended upon me, cease and desist letters, frivolous lawsuits for intellectual property theft, accusations of poaching clients. It was a war of attrition. He wasn't trying to win in court. He was trying to bankrupt me, to bleed me dry with legal fees until I had to surrender. I sold my apartment on the Upper West Side and moved into a tiny studio in Astoria. I poured every last cent I had into my legal defense and into Cassandra Analytics. Mark and Sarah agreed to work for equity. We were running on fumes, but we were united. Our strategy wasn't to go after Arthur's big fish. That would be suicide. Instead, we targeted the smaller hedge funds, the boutique investment firms that were his secondary clients. I set up meetings, not as a salesperson, but as a consultant. I'd walk into their offices, open my laptop, and run a diagnostic that showed them, in real time, the hairline fracture in the Sterling Thorne algorithm they relied on. I never mentioned David's journals, I just showed them the data. There's a latent risk in your portfolio, I'd say calmly. A 1 in a million black swan event could wipe you out. My system can inoculate you against it. At first they were skeptical, But one by one, they saw the truth in the numbers. We didn't steal clients, we converted them. We offered them a lifeboat, and they took it. Word started to spread on the street, not as a news headline, but as a rumor, a hushed conversation in the steakhouses and private clubs where the real business of Wall Street happened. A ghost was haunting Sterling Thorne. The pressure was immense. Arthur's legal attacks intensified. Vanessa, in public, dismissed us as a parasitic startup. In a particularly nasty interview, she referred to me without using my name as a disgruntled former employee with delusions of grandeur. The insult barely registered. I was too busy working. I had David's journals, my team, and a singular, all-consuming focus. I tracked market indicators, global political news, everything. I was no longer just looking for trends. I was waiting for the perfect storm. And then I found it. A confluence of events, a brewing sovereign debt crisis in Europe, a sudden spike in oil prices, and an unexpected interest rate hike by the Fed. Each one on its own was manageable, but together they would create a wave of market volatility, the likes of which hadn't been seen in a decade. The models predicted it would hit on a Thursday, in the final hour of trading. It was the storm David had written about. It was the trigger for the Achilles gene. The final phase required capital, more than I had. I needed a backer, someone with deep pockets, and a reason to hate Arthur Sterling as much as I did. I found him in Robert Hayes, a grizzled private equity billionaire whom Arthur had double-crossed in a hostile takeover years ago. Hayes was legendary for his temper and his long memory. I got a meeting with him at the pool in the Seagram building. He listened to my entire story without saying a word, his face unreadable. I laid out everything, the flaw, my system, the impending market shock. When I was done, he just stared at me for a long time. "So you're telling me," he finally said, his voice a low growl, "that you're going to bet everything you have on a storm that might not happen to destroy a man who is legally bulletproof?" "I am," I said, my voice steady. "And what do you want from me?" "I want to buy him," I said. "When his company is on its knees, when his stock is in free fall, I want to be the one to make the offer. I need your backing to acquire a controlling interest in Sterling Thorne Analytics." A slow smile spread across his face. It was not a kind smile. "I'm in," he said. "Give the bastard my regards." The final day felt surreal. I sat with my team in our small office, now upgraded to a slightly larger space in the same WeWork, watching the market tickers on a wall of monitors. The London exchange opened down, then Tokyo. The wave was coming. By the time the New York Stock Exchange opened, the mood was already panicked. The Dow dropped 500 points in the first 5 minutes. At Sterling Thorne, Arthur and Vanessa were putting on a brave face. Arthur went on CNBC that morning, a picture of calm confidence. "In a volatile market, experience and stability are what matter, he said, smugly. "Our systems are the most robust in the industry. We see this as a buying opportunity." I watched him on my laptop and felt a strange pity. He was a king standing on the beach, commanding the tide to stop. At 2:45 p.m., the wave hit. The Achilles gene triggered. It started small, a few bad trades, then a few more. Then the feedback loop began. The algorithm designed to minimize risk started chasing losses, selling low and buying high in a microsecond frenzy of digital panic. It was a digital hemorrhage. On our screens, we could see their clients' portfolios evaporating. The data flowing out of their servers was a river of red ink. The stock, which had been stable all morning, began to plummet. Down 10%, 20%, 40%. The financial news networks went into a frenzy. Sterling Thorne was in free fall. My phone rang. It was my lawyer, working with Hayes's team. "It's time," he said. We drove into Manhattan in a black town car, the city flashing by in a blur. We walked into the lobby of the Sterling Thorne building. The place was in chaos. Employees were running, yelling into their phones. The veneer of calm, untouchable power had been stripped away, revealing the raw panic underneath. We took the express elevator to the 58th floor. The doors opened onto a scene of utter pandemonium. Board members were shouting. Phones were ringing, unanswered. In the center of it all was Arthur, his face pale and slick with sweat, his silver hair in disarray. Vanessa was beside him, staring blankly at a screen that showed a waterfall of negative numbers, her perfect composure finally shattered. They didn't see me at first. I walked quietly to the head of the conference table where my life had been destroyed. I placed my briefcase on the polished mahogany and clicked it open. "Arthur," I said. My voice cut through the chaos. The room went silent. He turned, and his eyes widened in disbelief, as if he were seeing a ghost. Vanessa stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. What are you doing here?" Arthur stammered. "I believe you're having a technical problem," I said, my voice even and cold. I gestured to the screens. "A rounding error in a piece of legacy code, I believe. Under extreme market volatility, it creates a cascade failure. David Chen called it the Achilles gene." The last bit of color drained from Arthur's face. He knew. He had known all along. "My associates," I said, nodding to my lawyers who were now flanking me, "have already been in touch with your board members. As of 10 minutes ago, we have acquired a 51% controlling interest in this company. The stock was, very affordable." I slid a single document across the table, a term sheet. "This is a tender offer for the remaining shares. It's a generous one, under the circumstances. In exchange, the board has agreed to a complete change in leadership, effective immediately." Arthur stared at the paper, his hands trembling. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a dawning, horrified understanding. He saw it all, the planning, the patience, the sheer beautiful lethality of my revenge. "You," he whispered, the word rattling in his throat. "Me?" I confirmed. I turned my gaze to Vanessa. She looked completely broken, a porcelain doll that had been dropped on a marble floor. She knew her career was over, not with a bang, but with the quiet, humiliating fizzle of being on the losing side. "Vanessa," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion, "please pack your personal belongings. Security will escort you out." I used his exact words. The symmetry was exquisite. She didn't protest. She simply nodded, tears welling in her eyes, and turned to leave. Arthur just stood there, a fallen statue. The board members, my new board members, avoided his gaze, already shifting their allegiance to the new center of power. I walked past him, towards his office, my office, without another glance. The door swung open, revealing the panoramic view of the city I had once coveted, the city I now owned. I sat down in his large leather chair. It was still warm. I looked out at the skyline, at the millions of lights blinking on as dusk began to fall, and for the first time in a very long time, I took a deep, steady breath. The silence was perfect. Years have passed. Cassandra Analytics absorbed what was left of Sterling Thorne, and we built it into something stronger, something honest. The corner office on the 58th floor is still mine. The view is just as breathtaking. Last week, a brilliant young analyst, a woman fresh out of MIT with a fire in her eyes that reminded me of my younger self, asked me for the secret to my success. I found myself looking at a simple frame I keep on my credenza. It holds the cover of the original proposal Arthur slid across the table to me all those years ago, the one with Vanessa's name on it. I looked at the young woman, and I gave her the only real answer I had. "They told me it was just business," I said, and I believed them. The end.